maybe start halfway through and dissect one of them, but I'd like you
Okay.
just to go through because they are foundational as part of a value building exercise.
Okay. No, thanks so much. And as you say, chapter 5 talks more specifically about types of growth. This section, chapter 3, 4, and 5, I've called in the book the engine of growth, whereas the part 1, where we spoke about the courier guy and also the founder, I call that the founder's constraint, where I positioned, the fact that there are different ways of growing. So one of the points I made earlier on is about, different types of discipline, economic discipline, strategic discipline, and so on, governance discipline. So when it comes to strategic discipline, I try to make the book also relatable. As I mentioned, there are examples in the book. And then also I came from the perspective that the reader would already have had exposure to other books on strategy. So in my reading, in my writing, I obviously then also referenced other books, or I also looked at other books on strategy and the likes. So I didn't want to rehash again talking about, vision, mission, and, that kind of thing, but really try to distill it into a couple of areas where the reader can then use and take away. And then also the book has a strategy diagnostic where you can take these 6 items, which I'll talk to now, and you can actually assess, okay, item 1, how am I doing? And how mature is my strategy process? So the first one we spoke about the last time as well is basically operating in reality. And here, if you look at, let's call it MBA books, you will have frameworks like Pestelek, where it talks about, the political, economic, and the social technology and so on. So I didn't use that language in the book. I merely said, look, if you're operating in any business, you obviously have, you're operating in a competitive environment, right? You have other businesses that are at your level or maybe larger, or have advantages that you may not have, or you may be relatively have other competitive advantages. So understanding the competition, understanding how you stack up is important. Understanding what's happening in the industry is important. Understanding, global factors. We're living in an interconnected world. So, if one talks about what's happening geopolitically, with the conflict in the Middle East and so on, how does that impact my supply chain? How does it impact my input cost? So in South Africa itself, what are the legislative environment impact that it's going to be impacting in your business? So that's the first thing. And the reason why I also mention that is, when I was in corporate, I have had instances where working alongside a founder, when, it comes to strategy setting, in the one instance I remember, the idea was to go off site. And then in that particular instance, the idea was also to involve a lot of people that are not even connected with the business. Granted, it might have been an unusual situation. But in that instance, the strategy session almost looked like a beauty parade. You're getting a lot of people and you can now tell them how great this business is. And that's not a useful thing to do. What you really should be looking at is critically look at your external environment, and whatever decisions you make at the strategy setting session, those should be based on certain deltas, certain levers in your business that can take the business forward. And how do you know that? By looking at both your external environment and then your internal environment, which is the next point. The next point is then build internal capacity. So firstly, I say look at the market reality. The second one is then building internal capacity. And what the book does, it follows an arc throughout the book where some of the concepts are introduced initially, and then it goes further and expounds on that. So one of the areas that I discuss in the book is on leadership and talent. And there I talk about the leadership of the founder and also talent acquisition, retention, and so on. So that's part of what I call building internal capacity. So having the right human capability in the business is part of what I call internal capacity. So you've looked at the external environment, you've seen what the rules of engagement are, as some people will talk about critical success factors and key success factors. So the factors that are important for you to be in the game, and the fact in terms of the industry, and the factors that sets you apart, right? So what are the critical and what are the key success factors? So those forms part and parcel for me of building internal capacity. Some people would use tools like a SWOT analysis. That's also useful. I don't necessarily mention it in the book, but the idea is that, what are the things that you need to do well? This could also be systems and processes. What systems and processes do I need in my business to be able to compete? What are the gaps that I have competitively to compete? Then the third one that I talk about is what I call target available market, right? So I say that you can have you can understand the external environment, you can build capacity, but the capacity that you build is really for the purpose of it's for the purpose of winning. So the idea is these 6 factors should put you in a situation where you build long-term growth, give you a winning position. So the third factor, and this is now where I get to add examples, is about building a valuable market. Now, here I mentioned 2 examples, and we can go through them. So the first one is a company called M-Pesa, which is in Kenya. And I pick up the M-Pesa story again in chapter 4 when we talk about business model. But why I mentioned M-Pesa is that, it started off as a simple, I think they were looking to do small loans between, consumer loans. And eventually the business model morphed into payments. Because what happened is that people were using the platform not necessarily to get a loan from M-Pesa, but they're using the platform to give loans between one another, payments between one another, should I say. In other words, people were sending money as opposed to getting a loan from M-Pesa. They were using the platform to send money to other people. And then from there, it morphed into a payment platform and so on, and also regional expansion. So now suddenly the market is not only Kenya, it's a broader market, Africa market with multiple products. And now you can scale, right? You can have a model that has operating leverage. Once the fixed cost is met, it begins to leverage. The other one that I also mentioned under target a variable market is Curro. So I mentioned, and I'll maybe stop after this and we can go through the other aspects. But so the next one that I mentioned on the target available market is Curro. So Curro, I came across as I was finalizing the book. I think there was a story about PSG, delisting Curro and creating a fund for, philanthropy and so on. I forget the whole story, but effectively, what triggered me about Curro is their business model. So what they did is, again, a founder-led business, someone who was a teacher before started this business, and he saw a gap in the market. And the gap was this, that if we look at South Africa, we have a challenge when it comes to education. A large, much of the population is young and in need of sound education. In some ways, there's a lot of challenges in the education system. And so the public sector, a lot of people are not necessarily, satisfied with the quality of service that they're getting from the public sector schooling. On this other side is many people can't, or most people can't afford the high-end private education because obviously you're talking about significant amounts of money per annum. And so what they were looking at is an affordable, high quality. So it's not dumbing down the product, but finding a more efficient way to deliver effectively a good quality education and a holistic development of the individual, sports, extramural activities. And they were able to, identify this market and actually build a business over the last 20 years or so, where campuses all over South Africa, because the market is big enough. And my point with these points, and particularly this last one, is that you will have to make those strategic decisions. If your market is not going to allow you to build this valuable business, maybe you need to pivot to another market, or you need to get into adjacent markets like M-Pesa. But the size of the opportunity, if you look at any of these major technology companies or major listed companies, you obviously have to firstly identify a market that is big enough for you to create value in.